Jeff Reichert wrote and directed Gerrymandering. He's joining us from New York City, and Assemblyman Hakeem Jeffries is with us tonight in studio. Gentlemen, thanks very much for taking time to discuss this film with us. It's really a great film. I feel like, Jeff, that we should call it Gerrymandering.
Well, if we want to be technical about it, we should call it gerrymandering. But you know, most of the people who still use the proper pronunciation of gerrymandering, you know, they're sort of the old school gerrymanderers, the folks who started doing redistricting in the 1960s and the 1970s. It's pretty much common parlance these days to go with the soft G gerrymandering.
Well, tell us just very briefly how it is that you got interested in this, and then how you found Hakeem, because the Assemblyman has an unusual story, but actually, as it turns out, unfortunately, all too common. I thought it was unusual. He got redistricted out of his own district on purpose. But just tell us a little bit of the background about how that happened.
Sure. I mean, I first became aware of redistricting when all those Texas legislators fled the state in 2003 to flee Tom DeLay's mapping plans. And it got me thinking, well, God, what is this thing that everyone's so hopped over? It's just a map. But when you start to look at the implications of that map in Texas, but also the maps that we draw in every state nationwide, you start to realize that every single American is affected by redistricting every 10 years, and most people don't really know a whole lot about it. And so, a kind of circuitous path led me to Hakeem, interviewing people from Common Cause in California, and then Common Cause in New York. And the head of Common Cause in New York, Susan Lerner, told me this really interesting story about an assemblyman who had been, the first time that he ran for office was, he ran against an incumbent, and he'd been drawn out of the district by a block because he had the gall to actually challenge a longtime Brooklyn insider. And then I went, I emailed Hakeem. I went to his office, and then I saw the district map on the wall, and I said, "Oh, lo and behold, I live in Hakeem's district," and so I was affected by this redistricting
We
as well.
actually have that map, and I'd like to take a look at it. It's pretty interesting. And Assemblyman, this is your district before. You were in Assemblyman at the time Roger Greene's district. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then afterwards, it looked like this. So what happened there?
Well, in 2000, I was an insurgent candidate, had no real money, no real backing, no real prior political experience, but just decided I had grown up in the community. We were represented by a 20-year incumbent who was backed by the local political machine, and who I felt wasn't providing us with the representation that we deserved.
Didn't he have a scandal? Like, he had an ethics problem, too.
He did have a scandal, but that came subsequent to my challenges.
I see.
Prior to 2006, when I was ultimately elected, although that does kind of relate to the story in some
I'm getting
degree.
ahead of you, sorry.
Well, that's okay. So in 2000, I challenged him. I'm not successful, but I get more than 40% of the vote. And so I shock him, I shocked the local Brooklyn Democratic machine, and I guess they decided that something needed to be done about it. Now, I had the unfortunate experience of running in advance of a redistricting year. And so as we headed into the next redistricting cycle, I remember in February, I went to bed, I was in one assembly district, I woke up, the lines came out, I was someplace else. And so at that point, I realized that this had to have been deliberate, presumably part of a process designed to discourage me from running and discouraged me from challenging this particular incumbent.
So you moved.
So ultimately, there was a scandal, as you mentioned, that came out in 2004. The incumbent assemblyman was forced to resign, but he resigned and immediately a few days later ran for re-election. He ran unopposed. Everyone in the community couldn't understand why in the world in 2004, after he resigned, pled guilty to fraud and misspending of money, why in the world would this incumbent be allowed to run unopposed? Well, the reason was, presumably, at least from my standpoint, I couldn't run. I had been cut out of the district, and you need a year residency to get back in.
That's right.
And so ultimately in 2005, I moved back into the district and was able to be successful in 2006.
So Jeff, what struck me about watching this movie actually was how long gerrymandering has been going on, because we're talking now in New York about, like, we're pushing for nonpartisan redistricting, and there's all this reform that's been going on, and other states have been trying it for years with mixed success. And in terms of the outright fraud, which is what some people in your movie call it, that's been perpetrated, it's been going on since, well, since, you know, the revolution. I mean, basically.
Yeah, one of my favorite gerrymanders, and it's one we couldn't quite figure out a way to incorporate in the film, but there was a gentleman by the name of Patrick Henry who, you know, he was drawing districts in Virginia in the late 1790s. And there was an up-and-coming candidate named James Madison who happened to disagree politically with Patrick Henry, and so Patrick Henry drew James Madison's house out of the district that he was trying to run in.
Hakeem's experience.
Thomas Jefferson had to intervene to sort the whole thing out. And so, you know, James Madison might not have become president had he not been elected to the Virginia House of Delegates in that election following that redistricting.
Which is actually a perfect segue for this other great part in the movie, and I think a lot of people don't know this, that President Barack Obama, back in the day when he was an elected official in Illinois, had a hand in redrawing his own district that basically led to a confluence of events that enabled him to become president. And had he not done this, he probably would not have been elected because he wouldn't have been an official.
Yeah, I mean, Barack Obama, if he had won Bobby Rush's congressional seat in 2000, would probably still be Congressman Obama